Okay, thank you. We're going to move into the financial section and go right to the PMA report. If you'd like to introduce our guest. And we'll come back with the Chief Financial Officer's report after the Wellness Committee report.
Howard Kraus from PMA. He's been here the last several years. And it's still PMA, correct, Howard? 5-Site is just the overall software program?
We've spun off Forecast 5 as a sister company, as a spin-off, as we shifted our software platform for financial projections from under the PMA umbrella to the Forecast 5 umbrella. I still get a check from PMA, so I think that's who I work for.
Who's providing the service to us, PMA or Forecast 5?
Depending on the service itself, but the financial projections are under the Forecast 5 umbrella.
Who'd we contract with to do the work?
Forecast 5.
Never seen the name before. We couldn't have possibly done a contract with them.
Is it PMA or Forecast 5, Tim, that we contracted with?
I don't know the exact, I mean, it comes from PMA, they call it now Forecast 5 or not.
Okay. So I think Tim's concerned that...
My concern is they're two separate companies and we contracted with one of them. And we you know, it's clear when we have duties and how much we can bid on a company if we can keep going in, and you can't just contract with one company, and if they decide they're a different company, then we would have to enter a contract with a different company to provide the services in order to follow our policies and the state statute. It does make a difference.
I think our contract is under 8,000, so I don't think we would have to worry about bid, but you are right about the policy.
Yeah, I
So-
think when the contract comes, it comes from people at PMA, it comes from Howard. If they formed a sister company to do this, I mean, that was something that I wasn't aware of.
We can check into that, Tim.
Thank you.
So at this time, we're a little earlier than we've been. I think some of the uncertainty in the political arena and more experience with what we were doing, the district accelerated presenting to you. If you remember, we've used these projections within the district in several different ways, and often with multiple iterations during the course of the year. The advantage of having this first run at projections in December is it's sort of that broad, where do we think we're going to be with revenues and expenditures, to be able to present to the board, here's what it looks like with that broad brush. Now we need to start to get direction from the board and to fine-tune that as you move into true budgeting at the general ledger level during the spring of the year. So I'd like to present what we have. You'll note that we've used the cash balances from June 30th of each year. The FY16 budget as presented in the general ledger for the district is the basis for our projections. One of the advantages of our new software is we're down to that finite or granular a level rather than just at the state board budget level. The assumptions I sat with Tim and with Kevin a couple of weeks ago to review where the district's assumptions were on revenues and expenditures, presented that back. Tim provided some fine tuning to that, and so what you have is the outcome of those conversations. We are expecting equalized assessed valuation, the existing EAV, to be flat for your upcoming extension that is the result of your levy for this year. And as Tim said, consumer price index that you're using for that levy is 0.8%, 0.8%. The county, because of the reassessment cycle, we're expecting EAV again to be flat for next year, and then when your turn in the barrel comes up in levy year 17, we would expect to see 5% increases in EAV. And we're sort of hoping we're returning to the pattern that Cook County had prior to the last two cycles during the dramatic downturn in property values. New construction, we've continued to reduce that assumption over the last few years. We're being pretty conservative with a $200,000 per year of new construction. So with your tax rate for $200,000 of new construction, you're really talking probably less than $10,000 of property taxes in addition to the consumer price index 0.8% for your operating funds. The projected CPI at this point that we're using is 1.5% for subsequent years. We are expecting the November CPI to come out the end of next week, and we're running under that 1.5% through October, so we're trying to keep an eye on that. The number that comes out in January that reflects the year-over-year change for calendar year 2015 is what would be applied to levy year 16. I would also throw in perhaps somewhat of an editorial comment. It's my opinion that given the number of pieces of legislation that have been through one house or the other in Springfield, that there's a high likelihood that we will see a property tax freeze for that as it applies to Cook County for levy years 17 and 18. That in effect would replace the CPI, whatever it would be, with a 0% CPI for those two levy years. That's something you certainly want to keep an eye on. We don't expect anything now to happen until at least January. Several of the bills that had those provisions in them were on postponed consideration, and those deadlines were extended last Friday into the end of January. So there, one form or another of that kind of legislation is still alive in one house or the other. When we've calculated estimated GSA, general state aid, we've continued with the current status quo that the foundation level would remain at $6,119, which is the number that has been in place for general state aid calculation since 2009, I believe, and that we would continue to see general state aid prorated at 92% as it is this year. That said, I think there's some bright spots on the general state aid horizon, and we'll get to in just a few minutes. Transportation reimbursement is increasing at the same rate as expenditures, assuming that the state will continue to make the prorated payments at the same ratio moving forward, and that they will make them on time, which of course they didn't do in 2015. There are a few one-time adjustments. So when we look at the next slide, the pie chart, those of you on the board quite well aware that 82% of your revenues come from local property taxes for operating funds, another 10% from local fees and resources. General state aid only presents about 3% of your revenue, and other state revenue at about 4%. So we look on the next slide, 5. Looking at the aggregate revenue analysis, what is most important there is seeing that overall revenue is increasing between a high of about 2.5% to a low of about 1% in the out years. Remember, in the out years, projections are better for the upcoming year as you're getting ready to do real budget preparation. We're piling assumption upon assumption, and so when we get out to 2021, what we're really concerned with is a general direction. The general direction, as you'll see, is that you are anticipating with this set of assumptions that you would bring down your fund balance to support the assumptions that are in the software today. So on page 6, I mentioned general state aid.
Howie, can I stop you real quick on the
Please.
revenue? Are you anticipating only the 25% increase from 16 to 17 just because of the CPI projected to be at the 0.8?
Yes.
Okay.
There's also some one-time adjustments of loss of revenue and a couple of smaller amounts in your other local revenue, things that were one-time revenues or were ending in 2016 that are not included in 17.
Okay.
Can you explain the general state aid line? It doesn't
Yes.
seem to
Love to.
connect to what you said so far.
The general state aid, the primary criteria to determine how much general state aid you get. One part is the students who are identified, a percentage of your average daily attendance that's identified as low income by the Department of Human Services. That number's down, but it's down across the state. It's not specific to Riverside, Brookfield. More importantly, the average daily attendance drives the biggest portion of your general state aid claim. And it's a 3-year average unless the last year was higher than the average. Well, the 3-year average going into 2016 was brought down by what appeared to be a blip in the average daily attendance in 2014. It was lower than it had been in previous years and lower than it was in 2015, but the average was still higher than the percentage. I'm sorry, the average was still higher than the 15 number. However, anticipating that the percentage of average daily attendance, as you heard earlier, at 94.7%, 94.3%, is running at or above what you were in 2015. So what's going to happen with your equalized assessed valuation going down and your average daily attendance going up, when we run the calculations for next year, we anticipate a pretty significant, for you, jump in your general state aid for 2017. It's $500,000, I think.
Then that goes down in 18.
It does. You get a little bit of flattening off, but that's partially because then you're starting to see your EAV starting to come back.
Okay.
And so that, to the state, that means you have more local resources per student.
Here's why I struggle with this when I see these presentations from you. It's for the public to understand too, not just us. And on the prior, page 3, it says general state aid remains at 6119 foundational at 92% proration. And then I look at the chart and the numbers are almost doubling next year, and then they're going up and down by, some years 16%, 8%. I don't understand how I connect, or how I expect somebody else to connect, the concept that the GSA appears to be unchanged over the years with tremendous fluctuations in the general state aid, and how we're supposed to absorb that and think about it in terms of which is right and which is wrong. Is it going to stay the same and your numbers are wrong? Or can we kind of contemplate that we're actually going to have 500,000 more in general state aid next year or not? That's a lot of money for a district our size.
Absolutely.
So that's why I struggle when I see these presentations. I'm trying to understand how I should absorb it, and when I have the discussions with the board members and the administration, should we rely on this or shouldn't we? Or which part of this should we rely on?
Mm-hmm.
So can you put a little color on that, why
Sure.
it's hard to contemplate what you're trying to present here?
So the state formula, as it's applied to the 850 districts, uses a number of $6,119 per student as their benchmark of what the total should be of local resources and state resources for every student of average daily attendance across the state. So that 6119 is really more, and the 92% is really more about the amount of money appropriated for general state aid across the entire state. So far, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so this year, the amount that was appropriated was only 92% of what the formulas for every district in the state said general state aid formula should have provided. And so you only get 92% of the calculated amount for the district. So then the state takes that 6119 and by district is looking at, they calculate what the local resources are. And the primary one is how much do you get from property taxes? And then the gap between that and 6119 is supposed to be filled by general state aid. But because it's prorated, you only get 92% of the money that's going into that gap. So as a whole across the state, that's where that 92% of 6119 come in. It's when we get to the actual district where what's happening with your property values and what's happening with your ADA, with property values coming down and ADA up, the state sees that as you having fewer dollars behind every student, and therefore it should make up more because the gap between your amount and the 6119 is bigger.
So when
And
Tim
that's
does-
what we're seeing coming in 17.
So when Tim does his budget for 17, should he be budgeting 90 to 92% of that 1.2 million?
That is 92% of what we would assume you would get.
Okay.
And we can show Tim, we certainly can show Tim the calculations and can run it through the state form, which is what we do.
When we go to finalize the budget for 17, we'll have the actual numbers from the state for general state aid by that point in time.
Assuming
get
there's a
them-
budget
For 16.
for the state.
No, we have them for fiscal 16
We're in fiscal
now.
16.
For fiscal 17, we'll get those numbers next July.
We know it before the year starts, how much they're gonna give us?
Not before the year starts, probably into July.
Oh, right.
But before
right,
you
when it's-
approve the budget.
Before we approve the budget?
Yes.
Okay. And why does it go up 16% in 2019 and then down 8% in 2020 and down 4% in 2021 then?
That goes back to the cycle of equalized assessed valuation going up 5% every third year and then
Right.
leveling off. So in the year that it goes up, 2 years later, it looks like you have more resources per student because the EAV is always 2 years in arrears.
Okay.
And then when it flattens off, then there's fewer dollars per student.
Thank you.
On the expenditure side, the key assumptions, you'll note in some of them that you see the one-time $6.5 million transfer from working cash to capital improvements. It was a timing issue from when you sold the bonds to when you're moving the money over. Salaries are subject to negotiations. The current contract are tied to CPI. Additional teachers were added each year to see what would happen. How did that impact the budget? Estimated medical insurance costs increasing at 7% a year. Purchase services, supplies, and tuition, which make up the majority of your expenditures other than salaries and benefits, are increasing at 2% a year. Other expenses were held, like capital outlay, held at 2016 levels. Transportation contract increasing at 2% per year. So on the expenditure side, about 72% of your budget spent on salaries and benefits in your operating funds. Purchase services includes tuition costs and contractual costs. Those have not changed dramatically over time.
Also
Purchase
includes
Purchase
earmark.
services have.
Okay?
We've had a big increase in special ed tuition. And that's why I know we put this at 2%. That's something we really have to dig into because those tuition expenditures on special ed have been increasing pretty rapidly with the number of special ed individuals we have at the school.
Okay. One of the advantages of the software is if we're looking at the changes that are occurring as you're putting that together, very easy for us to make the assumption change even down to the line item.
So let's go to the big expenditures, 60% on the salaries. Do you have the specifics of what you put in from a standpoint on those latter years after the contract years and added number of teachers that we projected in there?
I don't have those with me.
But we have added teachers in there.
Yes.
All right, all right.
Yeah, because you need to explain that, because you're, on page 7, you say that salary subject to negotiation tied to CPI, and then on the page where the expenditures are showing a greater than 4% increase. You said CPI is 1.5, 8.8, and then 1.5 across the boards, and the salary increases are more than 4% for every year. So again, there's a disconnect between the language you say we're going with CPI, and you look at the chart, and it's 3 times the CPI.
The salary increase in your current contract has the increase in the base
Right.
is tied to CPI
Right.
plus the step increases.
Okay, but I couldn't get that when I read what you're presenting here. Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have projection summaries, and we're seeing salary and benefit cost 4.6%, 4.7% increase, 4.6% increase, 4.6% increase, 4.6% increase, 4.7% increase. So
Mary Ann,
implicit
can you
in
go to the
there.
next page?
That's on page
9.
Page 9.
right there. That, no,
Yeah.
that's, you can use that one. So implicit in there, as part of it, is the 7% increase that we're showing in medical insurance, but that's probably maybe 10% of that cost. I don't know. I mean, top of my head, guess, I don't know. So implicit in there is increase in number of teachers, because we're not, you know, I think we conservatively used similar metrics off of that contract, right?
Yes.
It's increases in salaries, presuming out. Again, we're going to be in a contract negotiation coming up. But implicit in this is that we are looking, at least the projections are showing, they're demonstrating that we are going to increase the number of teachers.
That's what the current set of assumptions is, yes.
And it is drawing then a point to, like, in year 2021, we're in a hole of almost $2.7 million a year, which we can't. It's not sustainable to those kind of decreases in fund balance. Right?
I would absolutely agree.
And also, did you look at our head count when you were looking at the increase in teachers? Because according to the presentation we just got on that, the head counts are projected to decrease in 17 versus 16. And then a 40 student increase in 18 versus 17, which is based on what Dr. Skinke has told us before. I think it's about 15 students per FTE is kind of a norm. So that'd be about 2.5, and then a decrease from 18 to 19, and a 1 FTE increase in 20. So the number of increase in teachers that we're showing on here, when you take out inflation and you take out just a normal adjustment for head count, is greater than what those 2 other parameters are, right? So we're kind of showing an increase in teachers above and beyond what would be required because of the change in the head count in taking out an adjustment in the line item for 1.5% inflation. Is that correct?
I don't believe I know. I'd have to defer to Kevin.
I mean, you'd have to calculate the numbers, right? You'd have to take what 4% the dollars in, you know, assume what the CPI increase or whatever we project increase on salaries. You also have that portion that's health insurance going at 7%. We'd have to know the health insurance, the benefit portion of this number to really calculate that.
The board got the board got enrollment projections in November, not the staffing, future staffing projections, just next year's staffing, which is projected at increasing at a minimum of 3. The year after that, there's a slight decrease in enrollment, is that I think what you're referring to, Mr. Walsh, and then the year after that, it goes up by 40 or 50 kids. So if the board held consistent to their core goal of lowering those core classes, we could possibly try to remain flat the year after next, before that enrollment increase of 40 kids would come in.
So on the next page, we're bringing it together, revenues and expenditures. You see in the middle, the other financing uses is that transfer from working cash to capital projects. As Gary presented, looking at an anticipated deficit at this time of about $360,000, I'm sorry, $340,000 for FY17. At this time last year, we were looking at a bigger deficit than that. So if I'm assuming that board direction to the administration on where to bring in the budget takes that number and says, what do you need it to be, and that provides direction. Every dollar you save in the first year is obviously $5 that you save over that period of time. And you've done, over the last few years, you've narrowed that gap between revenues and expenditures so that you're in a better place than we certainly thought you would be a couple of years ago at this point. On the last slide, you'll see that obviously that if we just looked at fund balances and weren't aware that there was an inflated fund balance in 15 because you had sold the bonds at the very end of the year, the transfer brings it back down to more normal range. And then you see the impact in the red line of aggregate fund balances in your operating funds over a period of time, given this set of assumptions. The bars that are vertical are representing fund balances by each fund. You see on the far right, for example, that transferring the money out of working cash into capital projects brings that fund down significantly. All in all, the task, if you were looking at it, quantifying it with this set of assumptions for 2017, is not as big as the gap you faced in the last couple of years. But clearly, I think to the point you made, increasing 70% of your expenditures at a ratio like you're seeing creates a bigger and bigger deficit and draws down those fund balances.
What happened in this, you're on page, on page 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are the bars in 2020 to 2021, what's happening if they're all jumped up positive again?
Those are reflecting where we would anticipate each of the individual fund balances to be that contributed to the 3.745 fund balance in 2021. And the Ed Fund is the one taking the biggest deficit, which is the ones on the far left in the purple, or whatever color that is. They are right above the 2016. That's where the majority of the deficit for the operating funds in 2021 is showing up, is in the Ed Fund.
So the reason it's higher than the red line is that's,
Yeah.
I think that's what he's questioning.
Why is
I'm
the
sorry.
purple line on the left of 2020, 6,000,004 in the positive off the chart almost, and the rest of them were right close to?
He's got two different charts on the same chart.
Right.
I know that.
So,
Just compare 2015 to 16 on the bars and 2020 to 21 on the bars. 2015 to 16, you have some minor pluses and some minuses, and 2020 to 21, they're all almost 5 million or more. I don't understand it.
well, you have a projected deficit in 21 of $2.6 million. And so those fund balances by fund have to drop somewhere. And the majority of that drop is coming in the Ed Fund.
So the purple line's not showing a positive. Purple line's showing that
According
it's,
to the left, it says it's 10 point some positive $million.
that in 2015, in your working cash fund, you had a fund balance of over about $12 million.
Right.
And you're transferring $6.5 million out of that in 16.
Right.
That's the drop from the purple to the yellow.
Of just the working cash fund.
Right. And that equates to the drop from the 16.9 million on the red line for 15 to the 10.4 million in 16.
He's talking about this line.
The red line, there's no confusion on the red line.
Okay.
Okay.
The bar graph on the very right, the purple is at over 10 million, right?
Yeah.
We transfer that to the capital fund, right?
This year.
It drops to the yellow, because it's now out of the education, operation, maintenance, transportation, IMRF, and working cash funds. That's how those working cash bar graph on the very right goes from tall purple to lower yellow.
So
Right?
the
Because we transferred it out of those funds into the capital project.
What year?
From the purple to the yellow.
What year do we do it?
From 2015 to 2016.
Why does it right above 2020 then?
But that's the red line. Those numbers, yeah, at the very bottom of the page, there's a purple with a 2015. Those are explaining the bar graphs. The numbers above that, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, explain the red line.
It's commingled. Don't commingle them next time, please. It's completely confusing.
Okay.
All right?
Any other questions?
So what the story is saying is that we're averaging somewhere just over 2% in revenue growth a year,
Yes.
right? And our salary and benefits are, was it 80%? 60% of,
70-some%.
70 of our total cost?
72.
72, right.
And we're saying that times basically 4.5%. So that's north of the overall revenue growth that we're getting.
Yes, it is.
And from the standpoint of the other expenditures, shows a pretty well controlled under the CPI, under the 2% to try to make up for that.
Yes.
To some degree, if we can.
Mhm.
But in there is our issue with special ed and the purchase services and the tuition growth that we've been experiencing, the transportation costs associated also with that we have some control, but minimal control. All right.
Anything further? We're moving on.
There's no other questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Tim, I think one thing that would help is if we, Howard, I know, as a purchase service contract, we'll check into that on the semantics of the contract part, but I think one thing that might be helpful going forward with the board, it'd be nice to see a snapshot of, here's where we were in December, and here's what our budget looks like, and how close are things coming in for our budget purposes to where we're at with the forecast, or when we, you know how we talked about at the end of the fiscal year, kind of doing a brief summary, and either the assumptions, or it might be nice just to bank that against this, because then it's wrapping in all the financial resources we're using. So here's how we projected it we would be in December, here's where the fiscal year finished up, here's where the projected budget is in relation to this report. So then we can start seeing like how much we should bank on this, or if we need to adjust assumptions going forward in the future.
Okay.
Would the board agree?
Yes.
Tim, what is our policy for the fund balance? What percent are we supposed to be at?
20, I believe.
25, I thought.
Yeah, it's higher.
Okay, so this projection, from one end, wanting to put in additional teachers counters our financial goals of keeping that fund balance at that percent.
Yeah.
All right.
And Tim, our policy is lower than the state recommendation on top of it, right? I thought the state recommendation was 30% fund balance.
Yeah, I think the state would probably say 33%.
33%. So we reduced our own policy
We did.
so that we had more money to work with, but we're pretty lean with the 22, right?
My first year here, we had to adjust our policy to 20 because with the deficit we were carrying, there was no way we were going to achieve the 33. So we adjusted our policy, and then I believe we just adjusted our policy.
It's 412, operating fund balances. Board of Education set a target on operating fund balance of not less than 33% of expenditures, represent approximately 4 months of operations.
Right.
But somewhere else it's less.
I thought there was one other one, fund balances. Is it that one? We adjusted it at the one time unless
Yes,
we,
we did.
unless we moved it back to 33.
Thought we did.
Thought we did. as
School
well.
district seeks a minimum 420 fund balance. School district seeks to maintain a cumulative year-end fund balance of 30 to 35% on its operating fund. If the fund balance percentage falls below the minimum percentage, the Board of Education shall adopt a financial plan annually to achieve the desired level. I think we lowered it and then increased it again.
Right, in 13.
Yeah, and I think part of it was when we got off the
Watch list.
we got off the self-funded health insurance because we had that fund that had major
Right.
revenues, but it also had major expenditures, and it caused the thing to be out of whack when
Right.
you couldn't get credit for the revenue. So I believe at the time we went to the outside health insurance and got rid of that self-funded program. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you.